Clemson, Alabama, Part 4. Who has the edge? Mark Rogers TV, the voice of college football, breaking down a third championship round matchup with Alabama taking on Clemson. Of course, the Tide won at 45-40 in 2015, despite the heroic 500-plus yard effort of Deshaun Watson. But Watson came back in 2016, down 14-0 to lead two remarkable drives in the fourth quarter, and the game winner, of course, 35-31. Kelly Bryant, not so much of a threat last year against the Alabama defense, losing 24-6 in the Sugar Bowl semifinal. All right, we're going to go position by position. And of course, you can go to our Clemson videos. You can go to our Alabama concentrated videos for more in-depth analysis of the Tide and the Tigers. But we're breaking down each position, and I'm going to give you my prediction. Keep in mind, in the bowl season, postseason play, Mark Rogers TV, the voice of college football, has come to play. And we are delivering the winners, 23-9 in bowl play, 20-12 against the spread. Here we go. Alabama at quarterback. On a scale of 1 to 10, this position is a 9.5. I don't really believe in perfection, but this is just about as close as it comes. And Tua Tagovailoa, a 41-4 interception touchdown ratio, phenomenal, 69% completion percentage. He is the very best when he is healthy, and he was relatively healthy for the Oklahoma game. And if he wasn't healthy, then that spells doom for Clemson, because he completed 4 touchdown passes and only 3 incomplete passes, 24 of 27. Of course, the Clemson defense is not the Oklahoma defense. He will have possibly his biggest challenge this year. I would say Mississippi State's defense is certainly comparable, probably overall better than Clemson's. Along the defensive front, this will be the best that he has seen. Mississippi State and Georgia would be the most likely comparisons along the front with Clemson. Clemson does also have to deal with Jalen Hurts, and even though he's the backup quarterback, of course, he has led this team, Alabama, to 2 national championship games, 75% completion percentage, 8 touchdowns, 2 picks. He is the rushing threat. He, again, is a winner. Look what he did in the SEC championship game, almost flipping the script of what we saw in the national championship game when Tua replaced Jalen to win the game and overcome a 13-point deficit against Georgia. So either of these quarterbacks, they have both done it under pressure in huge games, and it's a huge edge for Alabama in regards to the comparison with Trevor Lawrence of Clemson, and we'll get to Trevor Lawrence in just a second. But consider the depth at the position, consider the mobility of both players, especially Jalen Hurts, and consider the big game experience. Alabama at running back rates a 9 out of 10. They are tremendous. Damian Harris, the most complete back, 800-plus yards after a 1,000-yard season last year, 9 touchdowns. Najee Harris, exceptional, probably the most talented of the backs, 700-plus yards and 4 touchdowns. And how was Josh Jacobs, just a 3-star? What a complete back he is, catching 3 touchdown passes out of the backfield, 11 touchdowns, rushing, and over 500 yards. The Alabama battering Rams, we saw them against Oklahoma. Of course, the resistance is going to be much sterner against that Clemson front 7, especially the front 4, of course. But Alabama's run game is at its peak, at its best. We've seen it through this championship run with Mark Ingram and Trent Richardson, T.J. Yeldon, Eddie Lacy, and Derrick Henry, Bo Scarborough. This is what they've got for us once again. 3 capable running backs that will not go down without a fight. They will run as hard as any trio of running backs in the nation, with as much talent and explosion and speed, but also that just unrelenting power behind an offensive line that we give an 8 out of 10. You got Jonah Williams, probably the most talented of the players up front. Lester Cotton, Ross Pierschbacher, the leader. Alex Leatherwood, Jedrick Willis. They gave up just 14 sacks this year and 58 tackles for loss. Consider what the challenge is against the Clemson defensive line, the very best in college football. You heard me, 14 sacks given up by Alabama. They go up against a defensive line that sacked the quarterback 52 times with more than twice as many tackles for loss. But the Alabama offensive line has been stout, although I did see a statistic today that the Alabama ground game before contact is only going for 2.5 yards per carry. That means the offensive line push has not been what it's been in the running game compared to previous seasons, but still one of the best offensive lines in the country. Now let's go to the wide receiver position. Alabama is loaded beyond belief. This is the top wide receiver position in all of college football when taking the talent and the depth into consideration. We give it a 9.5. Jerry Jeudy's the star. He's the number one player. He's the Biletnikoff Award winner. 63 catches, 13 touchdowns, 1,100 yards through the air. Henry Ruggs will burn you deep. He's a speedster. Also is Jalen Waddle. They scored 11 and 7 touchdowns, respectively. Everybody has ridiculous stats. It used to be during the Nick Saban era at Alabama that you had one big-time star wide receiver and then the other guys just filled in. Of course, Julio Jones, Amari Cooper, Calvin Ridley. But this is an abundance of riches. It's ridiculous. Consider Devontae Smith. Of course, what he did as a freshman, winning the national championship game in overtime. He's been hobbled this year, but if the Oklahoma game is any indication, he's ready to roll. 6 catches against the Sooners for 104 yards. He caught 36 on the season and 6 touchdowns. And, of course, they've got an NFL-caliber tight end in Irv Smith with 40 catches and 7 touchdowns. O.J. Howard would have loved to have seen the football that much. The Alabama wide receiver core, again, consider that just last season, we're not going back 5 years, just last season, Calvin Ridley was targeted 97 times, and Jerry Jeudy was second on the team with 25 targets. Now Alabama has 5 players with over 50 targets. They spread it around. You don't know where they're going to attack the Alabama Crimson Tide on offense. All right, let's move to the Clemson offense. Let's go to quarterback with Trevor Lawrence. And, of course, Dabo Swinney made the decision to go for the gold. Even though he could have probably swept through the ACC with Kelly Bryant at quarterback, he knew that to stand up against specifically this team and to make a playoff run all the way and threaten for the national championship, he needed the guy that could deliver, and that's Trevor Lawrence. And he is not disappointed. 65% completion percentage, 27 touchdowns, 4 picks. He has transformed the offense. Few questions here. Not necessarily his talent, because he's as good as they come, but while not immobile, he's not a running threat. So he's not going to break contain and threaten the defense on third down. If it's 3rd and 8, he's not necessarily, unless there's a huge gap and a huge obvious run to the sticks for the first down, Trevor Lawrence is not a threat and not a quarterback that needs to be spied upon. Tua Tagovailoa is much more mobile, and certainly Jalen Hurts is better than the other two on the ground. The other thing is that he doesn't have the experience in this type situation. Of course, the Notre Dame game was huge. It was a semifinal, but he never got behind. He never had to come back from 10 or 14 points down. It was a tie game, 3-3, with about 7 or 8 minutes left in the second quarter, and then they exploded, and they never looked back, and he never had adversity. He hasn't seen adversity. The game at Texas A&M, Kelly Bryant made most of the plays in the second half and was on the field for most of the drives and the scores that kept Clemson ahead of Texas A&M to win that game. The Syracuse game, Trevor Lawrence, of course, was injured. And it was Chase Bryce who led the comeback against Syracuse and completed that final drive with the 4th down completion. So not facing adversity. We'll see how Trevor Lawrence responds in this game. He most likely will see it. And also there's the experience factor that goes in the Alabama favor at quarterback. Clemson running backs rate a 9 out of 10. They are exceptional, led by, of course, one of the best in college football, Travis Etienne. 1,573 yards, 22 touchdowns, and a ridiculous yards per carry of 8.9. He burned Notre Dame's rush defense for 109 yards on 14 carries. He vows to have a better game than he did at the Sugar Bowl against Bama last year. Tavian Feaster in relief used to be 1 in 1A, but certainly Etienne has proven to be the better back. Feaster has not had a game since game 2 or 3 in which he's had more than single attempts. Adam Choice an option as well, averaging 7.7 yards per carry. And Lynn J. Dixon is obviously or apparently proven to be the most capable of gaining rushing attempts in favor of Travis Etienne. But he's going to be the guy that's going to gain most of the attempts as long as this game stays close, and Clemson hopes it certainly does. The Clemson offensive line, I was interested to hear the comments made at the podium by Justin Falcinelli, the center for Clemson. He says and admits flat out, last year we were shocked, we were overwhelmed. We didn't realize how big and strong and physical they were. We didn't see it coming. We hadn't seen a defensive line like Alabama all season. And consider that last year Syracuse faced that North Carolina State front with Bradley Chubb, one of the top 5 players in the draft, in the NFL draft selection, and also other players going to the NFL draft. And he still made that comment, the Clemson center, Justin Falcinelli, about Alabama's front. They gave up 5 sacks in that game. They only rushed for 64 yards, but of course that was with Kelly Bryant at quarterback, who couldn't stretch the field. Clemson at wide receivers, tremendous. I don't quite rate them at this point with Alabama, but still extremely good, elite, near the top of the game. Justin Ross burned Notre Dame. Of course, he broke open the game and made the big plays in the second quarter that ended that from a competitive standpoint. 40 catches, 8 touchdowns, over 20 yards per reception for Justin Ross, of course, who hails from the state of Alabama. You got T. Higgins, exceptional player, 56 catches, 11 touchdowns. Amari Rogers had 52 catches and 4 touchdowns, mostly from the slot, about 10 yards per reception, moving the sticks. But nobody moves the sticks in the pass game better than Hunter Renfrow. His advanced metrics on third down are off the charts. 47 catches and 1 touchdown this year. And, of course, he is the player in the national championship game and in the playoffs against Alabama who has caught 22 passes in the playoffs and 4 touchdowns. And, of course, the game winner in 2016. All right, let's move to the Bama defense. The defensive line rates an 8.5. It is stout. Q Williams, he is a star, probably the best defensive player in college football. As a defensive lineman, at the tackle position, he had 67 tackles. That's unheard of. 18 tackles for loss and 8 sacks. Isaiah Buggs, an exceptional player with 13.5 tackles for loss and 9.5 sacks. LeBrian Ray. Raekwon Davis was probably the best player in this unit coming back from 2017 before Q just took it over. Alabama an 8.5 up front at defensive line against Clemson, but the big question mark is, where's the great pass rusher? He does not exist along the Alabama defensive front. I'm talking about not guys, they're capable of rushing the passer, but I'm talking about an elite pass rusher. If there's anybody, it comes from the linebacking position and Christian Miller. But Christian Miller is hobbled with a hamstring. So Alabama could be trying to devise schemes, blitzes, exotic blitzes that Clemson maybe doesn't have on tape to get to Trevor Lawrence. Christian Miller had 11 tackles for loss and 8.5 sacks during the regular season. Mack Wilson is steady with 65 stops. Dylan Moses is an exceptional player. 82 tackles, 10 tackles for loss, and 3.5 sacks. One of the best linebackers in the business. Alabama secondary is always the pride and joy of Nick Saban as an old defensive backs coach, and he has some great ones. But check out the matchup of Deontay Thompson, who is going to be charged most likely with the Minkah Fitzpatrick role of guarding Hunter Renfrow, especially on third down. And Hunter Renfrow made, at times, Minkah Fitzpatrick, a first-round NFL draft pick, look ordinary. Xavier McKinney, Savion Smith, exceptional players. Patrick Surtain, one of the highly rated cornerbacks coming out of high school, struggled against Oklahoma. Watch how he plays the ball in the air against these Clemson wide receivers. That could be a matchup that Clemson really likes in the pass game. All right, let's get to the Clemson defense, which is number 1 in the nation in points against, number 2 total defense, and number 1 in the advanced metrics in the S&P Plus. The defensive line is almost perfect. It's great. But the loss of Dexter Lawrence, even though many people have excused that, saying, well, it's come in maybe the most talented and the most dynamic position unit of any team in the country. That's true. But that's going to put a lot of pressure on Albert Huggins, the senior. He's 6'3", 315. He's very stout, but he has not seen double teams before. And Dexter Lawrence has been the guy that's taken the pressure off him and been the star. Albert Huggins is going to have tremendous talent around him, but he's going to have to hold up in the running game even more so than usual. Cleveland Farrell's exceptional, 18.5 tackles for loss and 11.5 sacks. Christian Wilkins at 13 tackles for loss and 5 sacks. The guy I love watching Clemson play defense. Austin Bryant, 14 tackles for loss and 8.5 sacks. He's a special player and is going to have a freakishly great game against Alabama and Tua Tagovailoa. Clemson at linebacker and secondary, there are some sketchy areas here. The linebackers are certainly good. They're very good. 7.5 on a scale of 1 to 10. Isaiah Simmons, well, he's going to have to deal with some slot receivers. That could be an issue for him. We'll see how he holds up after he had an exceptional season of 88 tackles and 8.5 tackles for loss. You've got Trey Lamar in the middle. He's going to have to call the defensive shots from Brent Venables, get everybody lined up. He had 79 total tackles, 5.5 tackles for loss, and 3 sacks. And Kendall Joseph comes back as the senior for one more crack at Alabama with 88 tackles. All right, the Clemson secondary at times was burned by Kellen Mond, especially in the second half as Texas A&M came back and got within 2 points on a failed 2-point conversion. And, of course, ripped up by the South Carolina passing attack and Jake Bentley for 510 yards through the air. Tanner Muse is the free safety and the leader back there, 73 stops, 2 picks. Kayvon Wallace, strong safety, and Nolan Turner, they both get significant playing time. They had 90 total tackles together. Trayvon McMullen at cornerback, A.J. Terrell. Mark Fields, his presence, his health is key. Mark Fields, an exceptional player. He needs to be on the field, pardon the pun, for the Clemson Tigers. Of course, defensive coordinator Brent Venables has been staying up all night, every night, ever since he probably snuck a peek during the second half of the Notre Dame game at Alabama because he has a lot to deal with, and this is a completely different Alabama offense than the 3 that he faced in 2015, 16, and 17. He will shake up the 4-3, make it look like a 3-4 at times, bring all sorts of schemes and blitzes to this game. Third down, of course, always key, especially in titanic matchups like this. The Clemson defense is 5th in the nation in holding opponents to just 28% conversions on third down. But, of course, the Alabama offense is number 2 in the nation in converting third downs. All right, we finally get to a obvious weakness, or I think weakness compared to other teams across the nation is an overstatement. It's just not a ridiculous strength for either team, and that's special teams. But let's keep in mind for Alabama, their kick return game is in great shape, with Josh Jacobs returning kicks for 31.5 yards per kick. Jalen Waddle at over 15 yards per punt return. They've both taken punts and kickoffs to the house this year. The Bama punting game, they have punted 2 different punters, and they're both averaging abysmal averages, 34 to 37 yards per punt. The place kicking better than it's been at 13 out of 17. All right, Clemson on special teams, we're going to give them a 6. We gave Bama a 7. Clemson has been worse on special teams in recent years. They shored a few areas up, but they're still not as good as elite as the rest of the team on offense and defense. Greg Hugel will finish his Clemson career, and it's been a shaky one and a rocky one at times, but he goes from walk-on to all-conference performer. He hit on 9 of 13 field goals this year, 2 of 4 from distance of 40-plus yards. All right, it's Bama, it's Clemson. We have no issues on the coaching staffs. They are the best in the business. Of course, Nick Saban seems to have the magic touch, and it took a heroic, ridiculous performance from Deshaun Watson to pull off the upset in 2016 and score 2 touchdowns in the fourth quarter to upset Alabama, and he squeaked it out 35-31. This is going to be a really good game. I'm going to fall short from calling it a classic, like gut-wrenching, down-to-the-wire last second. I wouldn't be surprised if that's the case, but here's the final score. When you look at concerns on the field, the only items that concern me for Alabama would be the pass rush. It could be inconsistent. It could be non-existent at times without that edge rusher, especially if Christian Miller is not up to 85 to 90%. And then also just trying to move out that Clemson defensive front that has been the best in the nation by far. It's not even close. The Clemson defensive line is so ridiculous, even without Dexter Lawrence. If they had Dexter Lawrence, he's this good. I would even think about altering my score because the Alabama offensive line, for as good as it is, and the backs as a whole, as a threesome, the best in the nation, will have trouble moving Clemson, but they've got to move it, and you got to think that Alabama running game will gain some yardage at some point. All right, so I'm not completely concerned about that, but the Alabama running game is probably not going to be up to its standard against this front. The Clemson concerns are broader. They're wider. Trevor Lawrence is not a mobile quarterback. He can move. He's athletic. He's not a statue, but he doesn't present a threat in breaking contain on a 3rd and 8 to run for a first down unless it's completely wide open. That concerns me. He has yet to face adversity. He has yet to face the big game and adversity in the big game. Of course, the Notre Dame game was big. That was his first step on the huge stage against what was supposed to be a big opponent. But of course, they never got behind. Okay, the Clemson offensive line holding up in both the pass game, but also moving Alabama off the line enough of a push to give Travis Etienne a crease to do something special from time to time. Of course, Travis Etienne in this Clemson ground game is not going to run for 5, then 7, then 4, then 9. It's not going to come like that. But maybe after a -2 and a 3 and a 1 and a 2 and a 4 and a -1, boom, Etienne can gain a crease and go for 18, can go for 24, 35. Unlike last season when the Clemson rushing game went for 64 yards against Alabama. That's my concern. The offensive line for Clemson, both in the ground game and in pass protection. And then finally, the biggest concern is the Clemson secondary. Yes, they are talented. Yes, they are fast. Yes, they were recruited highly. But they have obvious letdowns and breakdowns. And they can't have them against this Alabama wide receiver core. So that's a big concern right there. It comes from a plethora of wide receivers, and it comes from the tight end, Irv Smith, as well. Because of those concerns being broader and wider and at a greater length for Clemson than Alabama, Alabama's going to win the national championship over Clemson. Final score. The Alabama Crimson Tide 38, Clemson Tigers 31. You heard it right here at Mark Rogers TV, the voice of college football. Would love to get your predictions down in the comments section. And, of course, join us for all our coverage throughout the day on Monday. I've got a live stream headed your way at 1 o'clock Eastern Time. Then we're also talking to James Coleman from Fifth Quarter College Football to break down the matchup from a player's perspective. Then after the game, we will have post-game instant analysis live right here at Mark Rogers TV, the voice of college football. Then Wednesday morning, I will come back with more analysis after I break down the game on tape once again, and then release, finally, the final version of the Mark Rogers TV, the voice of college football top 25 that actually makes sense. Can't wait for it. What else can we do? We've got Clemson's side. We've got Alabama's side. We've got my prediction right here. We've got James Coleman coming up on Monday. We've got instant analysis after the game, more analysis from me, and then my top 25 to wrap it up. Right here, Mark Rogers TV, the voice of college football.